My name is Shaun Parkin, founder and managing director of Family Office Specialists, Hall Road Investments. I am Australian and based in sunny Perth. Welcome to this series of podcasts on single family offices.
This is the Family Office Sherpa.
Okay, some may know me as the Family Office Sherpa. I have a newsletter of that same name, which I send every 2 weeks and cover all things family office, investments, technology, and operations. In terms of clients, I specialise in investment governance, which often means I'm the boring one at the barbecue. And speaking about investment policy and strategy, while your mate Chad from next door is giving you the inside scoop on the next big hedge fund or AI stock. That is not me. I've been a stockbroker, an asset manager, I've worked in the gold mines, and I've even spent some time in the deserts of Mongolia trying not to freeze to death. Uniquely, I've worked with this single family office client type for over 12 years and specialise in clients with assets around $200 million to up to $10 billion. I help them improve, start, structure, close, and sometimes just generally give feedback on how to structure their family office investments. So what is this podcast about? It's a series of 5 and it aims to provide a guide. Now we're talking about a practical guide, not a theory guide here, for advisors and the family offices themselves looking for practical and implementable insights. I'm not providing investment advice, so please read the disclaimer in the show notes or talk to Chad from next door. All right, so let's get stuck in. Episode 1. And what we're going to talk about is the family office. We're going to define it. We're going to talk about the purpose and the structure. All right, to start with, let's discuss the 3 pressing points for those not familiar with the term family office. We're going to cover 3 things. In my opinion, what is a family office and why everyone's talking about them, who starts a family office and who shouldn't start a family office, and what is not a family office, most importantly. Okay, so in my opinion, what is a family office? A family office is a structure. That's really all it is. We're not talking about anything more than that. It's a structure set up to manage the assets of a single family. That could be the first generation, the second generation, the third generation, might be all the generations under one umbrella, but ultimately that's what it is. It's a structure. Sometimes it's a physical structure. It might be an office, or it might be a building, or it might be someone's house, but ultimately a single family office is a corporate structure set up to manage the assets of the family. And why are people talking about them? Because the people are getting recommended to open them, to start them, mostly from financial advisors and people like that, professional services, because what it does is it puts all the assets into one and it creates some efficiencies. There's some good reasons not to open single family offices, which we can dig into later, but ultimately that's what the structure looks like. So who's starting them? Those with assets of significance, really. So some say the minimum is around $200 million. I don't really have a specific figure that I look at. I look at complexity a lot of the time. I look at the reasons why, and we can dig into those in a second. But ultimately, if you want to start a family office, it doesn't really dictate by assets. It tends to be dictated by purpose. What is the purpose? So if you want to start one, start one. Call it what you want. But ultimately, this is what we're talking about, a structure like that. What are not family offices, though? So we have a lot of people using the convention in marketing and things like that. A family office is not a wealth manager in terms of if you are charging fees to manage the assets of a lot of people, you're not a family office, you're a wealth manager, and there's nothing wrong with that. Wealth management is an important, integral part of this space, but they're not family offices. You get multi-family offices, and some people conflate multi-family office and wealth managers. It gets very complex, and I used to be quite precious about it, but I'm not so much these days. Ultimately, the aim is to have these assets that are managed by one single structure, and if you're managing assets for other people and you're charging fees, then you're in wealth management or asset management. So really that's what they are and what they're not. And now the practical bit, which I like a lot, because it means that there's a practical, what the aim is for these podcasts or this series of podcasts is to be practical. So you can listen to each one and say, well, that's of interest, that's not of interest, but even having just an ability to say, this is a practical step that we can take as a family or as an advisor, because I think advisors have a very important part to play in terms of getting this structure right. So first off, establishing the office, the purpose, the structure, and the design. Okay, 1, purpose, my favorite, because a lot of the time people don't go into this sometimes expensive, complex way of establishing a model without understanding the purpose. What's the point? What are you trying to achieve? All right. So what is the point of establishing a family office is the number one thing. A lot of people just get told to start one or have told someone else has started one and they think they should do it. But really, it is up to you. It is a purpose point. Are we doing it for the right reasons? Are we doing it for things like stewardship, longevity, engagement of the next generation? Are we doing it because we want anonymity? Are we doing it because it's a more effective way of establishing a good investment structure? So you need to understand that. Have discussions with the family, have discussions with the advisors. Understand the point that you are adding complexity potentially where it doesn't need it. Some of the wealthiest, most sophisticated investors out there don't have a family office because they see it as being another piece of complexity when all they're looking to do is invest or engage in philanthropy or have engagement with the kids or having just boats and cars and things like that and are just looking for that lifestyle asset. So you really need to have a purpose. There needs to be a very good reason to start these sometimes complex, expensive structures. What are the options in terms of structure, right? So what we're talking about here is, do we want a building? Do we want everyone to come somewhere? Do they want to come to an office? Do they want to be in the region where everyone is? Should we do it once a year? All these kinds of things should be asked. But ultimately, a lot of people really like the idea of everyone coming into one physical building. Now, there are different structures. You can get single family offices that are physical. You can have virtual where everyone comes together. But ultimately, if you're talking about the implementation of a single family office, sometimes it's a really good idea just to have an office. I have plenty of clients that use that as their gathering space. Some people have offices where it might be in the house or there might be accommodation so people that don't live in the area or in the same city can come. A lot of people use some of the holiday houses or those estates that might be used as a touchstone for people, right? So if something that's been in the family for a long time, things like that. There's a lot of different ways to do it. But ultimately, when we talk about this physical structure, this is what we're talking about. And what are the alternatives? Do you know what? The best alternative a lot of the time is to not open one. It's really just a matter of going back to that central tenet of what is the purpose. If you have a liquidity event or if you have a significant wealth or you have intergenerational wealth, sometimes you just need to have someone that can look after your assets and you can give it to them. Sometimes just getting a good advisor is what you want to do. Okay, next point. Key functions and objectives. I know I've said purpose, but ultimately the functions and objectives are just as important. What is the core objective? Is the core objective wealth preservation? Is the core objective the investments and to grow those investments? Or is it estate planning and legacy planning? Is it philanthropy? You've got to understand what those functions and objectives are. What are some of the functions that we see with a lot of clients? Some clients use their office as a meeting place, others use it for investments or philanthropic. The biggest thing to do in terms of functions, don't make it a burden. Don't make it something where people go, oh, I have to go and attend the meeting at the family office. Oh, the family office is this or that, or it's, some people roll their eyes and say, this is not something that I'm engaged with. It's too esoteric. It's too far away from the actual running of the investments or the philanthropy or whatever it ends up being. So make sure the function and the form match up and make sure it's fun. Make sure it's interesting. Make sure people are engaged with it. If they're not going to participate. And often the reasons why people set up family offices is to have that engagement process, to get the kids, the grandkids, things like that. It really is sometimes just that meeting place point. Make sure it doesn't become a cost burden, a suckage of money for no output. Do the same thing that you would normally do with a cost-benefit analysis. If we're spending millions of dollars on managing this family office or this structure, but it's not actually producing anything of worth, then shut it down and move on. It costs a lot of money to run these things. There's a complexity, there's legal, there's resourcing, which we'll go into as well, but think of it objectively, but also think of it subjectively, right? If that's not contradictory, in that objectively it's for this, but even if it costs too much, even if it is not looking like on a value basis, a normal value proposition that it makes sense, but it is engaging people, it is keeping the family together, it is providing some worth, then be subjective and objective in the way that you value it. but make sure you review it. Make sure that you review the structure, the way that it's set up, and the reasons that you did in the first place, and make sure that you're still maintaining that purpose. Next up is structural considerations, probably one of my favorite pieces and the ones that we help clients a lot, which is how they're setting it up and the components, and to compare and contrast the different family office setups. So the 3 or 4 main things to think about: insourcing versus outsourcing. What are you going to do yourself, and what are you going to have others do for you? And what that mix look like. The governance structure, because this is a corporation a lot of the time, right? There's an element of there needs to be good corporate governance, there needs to be good investment governance, there needs to be structure and process. Staffing, one of the most difficult things to get right, not necessarily dictated by the underlying asset size, but often, again, swings back to that first point that we make, which is the purpose. And infrastructure, again, one of my favorite pieces. What does the reporting look like? What does the piping look like in terms of the investments and philanthropy and estate planning and advisory and vendors and things like that? What does all that come together, and what does that look like? So let's start at the top. Insource versus outsource. We have a lot of clients that have very high skill level in specific asset classes, or they have a bias towards different structures. If you have that skill set, if you have that ability to make an efficient implementation of that investment class. A lot of people like property, a lot of people like public markets or private markets or directs and things like that. If you have an ability to do that, keep it in-house. If you don't have that ability, or you think that maybe it takes up too much time or complexity, then you look to outsource. We're starting to see a movement potentially away from insourcing everything. People insource because they like control. People outsource because they like effectiveness, efficiency, and taking advantage of de-risking, that someone else can manage that part of the portfolio or the philanthropy or something like that. So make that a part of your purpose, right? Make sure that you understand if your purpose is to manage this particular part in-house, then you can have that. If there's other aspects which you say, well, we'd like to control that, but we don't know how to manage these assets or these, and we don't want to resource these parts of the portfolio or the investment structure or the office, then outsource it. So, but really think about it objectively. Think about what's going to work for you, what's not, what's going to be effective, what's going to be costly, what's going to take time, and what can you and can you not resource for. So I think that's a really, really important thing, is to make sure that there's a value cost approach to it. Again, we go back to that subjective and objective structure, but ultimately, if you know how to do it well, you can do it efficiently, do it yourself. If you can't, get someone else to do it for you. Governance structure. This is what we're talking about when we talk about advisory boards. Some of the biggest family offices have some of the most impressive advisory boards out there. Titans of industry sit on these advisory boards. If you can't get access to those, or you don't have that connectivity, you can look for consultants, advisors, professional services, Big Four. You can use people that sat within the operating business. You can use it however you want to, but there's an element of governance there, which is someone that sits outside outside the executive and sits outside the family, most importantly. Someone that can see the woods for the trees. Someone that can be objective, someone that can provide a consigliere type of structure, or someone that can just, to a certain degree, be a critical friend, or what some people call a Dutch uncle. Someone that can come in and tell you the truth and not be afraid that you're not going to be giving them the next deal or transaction or something like that. Someone that can be honest with you and the family. Someone that can be independent. Investment committees is another thing. We see a lot of investment committees set up. We see a lot of investment committees that potentially might not be set up in a structure that is best of breed or best practice. They might have conflicts and things like that. I think the best thing to do when establishing any governance structure is just think about what the purpose is, what you can't do internally, and really pushing it up as a governance piece, not an investment piece, not someone that's looking to execute or transact, someone that can be there, again, as someone that can tell you the truth without fear or favour. Number 3, staffing. A very, very difficult thing to get right. Just like any corporate, you're looking to get the right people, the right cultural fit, and in the right positions. So we have some family offices that start with one single person. It might be the family member. It might be someone that's come over from the operating business. We see that a lot. you get the best people in first, those that agree with the culture, but also those that you can trust and things like that. And then you start to look at, well, what else do we need? And it goes back to that first point. What are we insourcing? What are we outsourcing? Are we resourcing it correctly for the amount of insource we're doing? And really, do we need this many people? Like all corporations, resourcing is complex, staffing is expensive, and you have to deal with a significant amount of moving parts. So when we recommend people start their office or start to look at resourcing, we start to think about first, do you actually need that resource internally? Can we get our counterparties to do as much heavy lifting as possible? And when you do resource it, when you start to staff, and we do work with some very, very large family offices, are you getting the right cultural fit? Because family offices sound like a good, fun place. People think of boats and cars and holidays and things like that. But a lot of the time, it ends up being a corporate job like any other. And you have to realize it's very, very different in that you will never be at the very top of that office if you are not a family member. So we're starting to see increased professionalisation, which is great. We're starting to see the attractiveness of working within the single family office. But again, cultural fit and resourcing is a very, very difficult thing to do. So take your time, make sure you understand who you need, who you don't need, and use your network and trusted advisors. There was a very good report recently from KPMG and Agreus and the Table Club, which was specifically about family office compensation reports in Australia. And I'll put that in the show notes as well, because it provides not only job descriptions, what other family offices are resourcing, but also, and very importantly, what the current market is and how much you should pay them. And number 4, my favorite, infrastructure, which is what we're talking about when we talk about reporting and technology. Most family offices, nearly all family offices, start on Excel for reporting. And when I talk about reporting, I'm talking about investment reporting. So when they have the liquidity event, someone starts investing, or you're bringing investments over into the family office, it is nearly always tracked on Excel. A lot of the time, the first employee has a finance or accounting background, so they tend to be very into Excel. The challenge with that a lot of the time is that you are on Excel. You are key person risk because there's usually only one person that knows how to run that Excel spreadsheet. But also you are at the mercy of data breaches. There's a significant amount of security issues with it. But also if there's one piece of data that doesn't match, or there's one piece of data that you can't bring over automatically, it ends up being an incredibly manual and high risk way of managing the portfolio. So we are starting to see a significant amount of single family offices and their advisors improve the investment reporting, which we help a lot of clients with. So make sure that your reporting is appropriate and fit for purpose. If you don't need deep dive analytics and things like that, don't spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on reporting infrastructure, but get it right. If you look at IRR as a metric, use the IRR, make sure that the reporting structure has it. If you've got domestic data feeds with banks and custodians and brokers and things like that, and that's an important part, make sure that's the primary objective. Horses for courses. So make sure it's appropriate, make sure it's within the structure that you're looking for, make sure the people within the office are using it. And that's the big part. If you think back to resourcing and staffing, it's very, very difficult to get senior investment staff to come into an office that doesn't have the reporting at the level that they need, and then they'll probably leave. Another thing to remember about infrastructure is the need for security, both from an ability to track investments, so exposure management, things like that, if you can call that security, secure in the way that you're managing the portfolio, but also data security. Once you have Excel, it becomes very, very difficult to manage who actually sees that data, who can actually get access to that data. All these kinds of things can be removed to a certain degree by improving the infrastructure, the operating infrastructure. A lot of the time that is moving to a cloud-based platform. If you think about the big ones in the United States, there's Adapar, Mastro, Solovis, things like that. Domestically, we have Premium and ShareSite. But really what it is about is getting it off Excel, getting it into a structure where you have time series data, you have permissions, you have the ability to put some ring fencing around who sees what, but also use cases. in terms of complexity and sophistication. It's a de-risking tool. A lot of people say, well, Excel is fine and it doesn't cost me any money, or isn't this someone else's job? But that is not the way to look at this. I think the way that we're starting to see single family offices and their advice firms across the board is moving to more robust and risk management software for the managing of these portfolios for all data. So I can't stress that enough. It is not a secondary piece of information. It's not a secondary thought. When you go purpose, when you go design, you go infrastructure, and you go managing the risk of data management. All right, so just to review, we've got the purpose, we've got the structure, we've got the kids coming in, we've got grandpa, we've got grandma, we've got mum and dad, we've got everyone coming into the single family office. We've got people coming down to the estate on quarterly updates and things like that. We know what we're doing, we know why we're doing it. We've got an investment team, we've got staff, we've got the right staff, we've got a cultural fit. We've got things like an outsource model that's working really well. We understand how much this is costing. We understand the purpose of it. We've got this really good mechanism in terms of saying, well, this is our job, this is someone else's job, but we are cohesive and we're managing it and we're managing the risk. We're reporting correctly. We have an understanding. It's called the Shaun Parkin Family Office, and we know what it's for and we're comfortable that it's in place. So that's the structure. That's how you do it. That's how you implement it. And that's really what you should be thinking about. Now go, write it all down, look into how others are doing it, talk to other families, talk to your advisors, talk to people like me, I guess. But really what I want you to understand is not everything is the same, but there is homogeneity. Like people say you see one family office, you see one family office, right? And it is kind of true to an extent, but there is similarities. There is people that have been through this journey before, so talk to them. Talk to people that understand the complexity, the risk, the cost, all those things that you probably don't when someone says, open a family office, and you go, you know what, that sounds like a great idea. I think we should do that. Stop, think, write it all down, understand the purpose, understand what it's not for, and best of luck with getting that right. So that's it for this episode. Hopefully it was of interest. I know I enjoyed it. And if you're looking for more information, obviously the show notes are a really good place. I'm going to put some very cool, interesting articles in there and white papers in there that I use and continue to use. How to structure it, deeper dives into it. Really give you some grist to the mill, I guess, for want of a better term, in terms of saying, this is how we can do it. This is best practice, but this is a good starting off point when we're discussing it. If you're going into a liquidity event, this is probably not a bad time to be having these discussions with family members and your advisors. If you've had your liquidity event a long time ago, a short period ago, if you're first generation, second generation, whatever it looks like, there's always a good time to review and make sure that you're on track. So thank you for listening. Next episode, we're starting to dig a little bit more into what would you probably call the investment policy and strategy. It is governance. Like I said, if you want stock tips, talk to Chad next door. If you want insights and if you want governance and you want the more boring part of the barbecue, talk to me. Subscribe to the newsletter at hallroad.com.au, and I'll see you next time.